Hello, it's Harper. Welcome to Pages and Reels. Today I wanted to discuss ITV's TV adaptation of Agatha Christie's Evil Under the Sun. It is the first episode of Series 8 of Agatha Christie's Poirot and was first broadcast on 20th of April 2001. I know this story has also been adapted into a movie with Peter Ustinov, and I do plan on making a video on that. I just thought it would get too long if I tried to lump both adaptations into one video. As usual, massive spoiler alert, so please go watch the episode if you haven't already, and I will be discussing the adaptation with the assumption that you have watched it. So, I liked this episode a lot. I thought despite some rather significant changes from the novel, it held its own very well. And the changes didn't impact the main plot of the story nor the spirit of the book, such as the reveal of the perpetrators. Maybe I thought a few of the characters weren't exactly how I had imagined them, but again, it didn't significantly alter the impact of the story, I thought. The biggest changes, or what I thought were the biggest changes, were number 1, the reason behind why Poirot was at the seaside, which added a humorous element to the story, even though I am not at all saying health issues are in any way comical, just the way it was set up was comical. Just a brief recap. Unlike the novel where Poirot just goes on holiday to the Sandy Cove Hotel, in the adaptation, Poirot collapses at the Argentinian restaurant that Hastings had invested in and tentatively gets diagnosed with obesity, something he becomes comically irate over. As a result, on the doctor's orders and Miss Lemon's very stern coaxing, he reluctantly goes to the health resort, which is Sandy Cove Hotel. Later on, it actually turns out to be food poisoning that makes him collapse, but you don't find that out until the end, much to Hastings' chagrin. The second big change was the child of Kenneth Marshall. In the novel, it's Linda, a girl, but in the adaptation, it's a boy, Lionel Marshall. Maybe to make it more believable that he could be a suspect in Alina's murder via strangulation. Big hands are emphasized in both the original story and its adaptation, and it does seem less believable that a teenage girl could strangle to death a full-grown woman without getting hurt herself in the process. Alina was hardly going to just passively stand there and let someone strangle her, so it would take a man's strength to overpower her quickly before she could fight back. ITV generally uses great actors for the Poirot series, so that also applied in this episode, though there were some personality traits that they altered for the characters. For example, the character of Stephen Lane is, I thought, more unlikable in the show, though both the novel and adaptation portray him as a religious fanatic. In the show, he projects a lot of his anger and bitterness that he feels towards his wife who left him for someone in the parish. He projects a lot of that anger towards women and Alina, though this actually turns out to be a bit of a red herring. The evil he keeps talking about in the show is actually regarding Patrick. I didn't quite understand how that worked. Was Stephen Lane trying to dissimulate by channeling his bitterness on women? I don't know, but yeah, an effective red herring regardless. He was also what I would say is a low-key prescription drug addict, or maybe addict is not the right word, but he was definitely dependent on the drugs, opioids, he says, that his doctor prescribed for him. And opioids are addictive in nature. So overall, clearly a broken, unstable character. The Stephen Lane in the novel is much livelier and doesn't mention a wife, seems to have no dependency on prescription drugs, and though also mentally unstable, I felt like he played a much more minor role to the story. I don't know if this will be controversial, but I really didn't like Rosamund Darnley, either in the original story or the adaptation. I don't approve of people hanging around married friends hoping and passively trying to break them up, which is what she did. Unless someone is in real danger, don't interfere with their relationship. Kenneth Marshall is a big boy. He made his choices, and you don't need to try and save him, Rosamund Darnley. He also made it clear that he would like you to shut up about it. This is me talking to Rosamund Darnley. Also, I found the actor who portrayed Rosamund Darnley, I found her way of talking very condescending and annoying right from her first scene. Overly enunciated and slow, and I felt like I was listening to a primary school teacher talking to her students. She emanates an arrogance that the novel doesn't actually portray her as having, even though I didn't like the character in the book either. And ITV removed the entire backstory to Marshall's first wife completely. How she was arrested for murder, got acquitted, and also how Marshall loves swooping in to play the hero. I wasn't a fan of Marshall at all in the book, but in the show I thought he was acceptable, if a bit stuffy, because they took his hero complex right out. And there wasn't a focus on the romance between him and Rosamund. In the book, a lot of focus is placed on the cringe romance between these two characters. The actors that played the Redferns were great. When they acted individually, they were believable, but their interactions together were very theatrical and performative, which is exactly how it was supposed to be. In the novel, it's one of the things that makes Poirot suspicious of their intentions. So, well played, Michael Higgs and Tamsin Mellison. They were the actors. Speaking of performative, Alina Stewart was genuinely played a little too theatrically by the actor. I also felt like she spoke noticeably louder than the other characters, which seemed unnecessary. Maybe that was a deliberate strategy on the actor's part to illustrate how much Alina wants to be the focus of attention, but it didn't really work and kind of fell flat with me because it just came across disjointed when compared with the rest of the characters. I felt like there were other more subtle ways you could portray a character's desperate need for validation. Maybe the actor who plays her, Louise Delamere, is such a nice person in real life that she wasn't comfortable playing an absolute harpy, because it was played like a teenager would play a Scarlet Woman in a school play. One-dimensional and stereotypical, which isn't Alina Stewart at all. Underneath all that glitter is actually a woman so vapid that it makes her vulnerable. It would have been nice to see that vulnerability coming through. Maybe Alina lashing out when another character mentions that guy that refused to marry her. So, for those of you who need a reminder, in the book, Alina gets rejected by a man that she thought she would marry, and it results in this huge scandal. So if she lashed out at another character for mentioning that, it could have implied that, that she's aware and hurt by the fact that she can't keep her men in the long term, and just gives her more character or something. Just my humble opinion. The quartet, Poirot, Hastings, Japp and Miss Lemon, are in their usual top form. The most unbelievable aspect about any of them is that Miss Lemon would be single. Actually, no, she would be the type to be single by choice. Wouldn't it be scandalous if she and Japp had a little frisson? Agatha Christie would turn in her grave. And anyway, Japp has his wife, Emily. In the book, only Poirot is present out of the four, but the addition of the other three characters in the adaptation is fine. There are a lot of other minor changes, but if I started listing them, it would go on forever. And like I said, none of them really changed the crux of the story. I genuinely laughed out loud when, in the last scene, Poirot teases Hastings about his Argentinian restaurant going under. Look out for that. I thought it was funny, though maybe they should have been more empathetic to his plight. Hastings is not good with money at all. That really comes through in the entire series. Anyway, that's it for now. Like I said, I have plans to discuss the other adaptation with Peter Ustinov at some point, so please watch out for that. And also please have a listen to my discussion on just the original novel, which is available. Bye!